Today, I'm going to go over how to determine all of your fixed setup adjustments for every NASCAR series, ARCA through A-Class Next Gen. We'll go over, most importantly, brake bias, but also steering ratio and steering offset, and a secret fourth setting, so stay tuned for that. And a quick disclaimer, everything here is not an objectively correct thing, it's just my opinion and what I use personally, so take it with a grain of salt, and always feel free to adjust for what you like. But first, let me do a quick self-shill. I am now offering group lessons, which are going to be at a cheaper price, but of course in a group instead of private one-on-ones, but I am still doing the private one-on-one lessons, link in the description for all of that. Okay, first we're going to go over how to determine brake bias. It's going to be a little bit different for each car, but the goal is going to be the same. You want to have the absolute minimum amount of brake bias or also the most amount of rear brake as possible without the car sliding its rear tire under normal braking. Now, that sounds pretty complicated, but it really isn't, so let's break it down a little bit further. So first off, what I mean by normal braking is just the maximum amount of brake input that you use during a normal race run. For 1.5 mile tracks, those intermediate type tracks, the max normal braking can be anywhere from like 10 to 25%. Not really a lot of braking at all. In fact, you are using your brake more to rotate the car than to actually slow the car down. But for tracks that you actually have to use the brake to slow down the car, like a short track, like maybe a mile-long track like Dover, something like that, you might need a brake input closer to 30-40%. And then finally, once you get to the tippy top, road courses, Martinsville, that's pretty much it. You get to that place where you can do 70, even 80% braking going into a corner. So taking that into account, at those high percentage of brakings or even the low ones for the bigger tracks, you just don't want to have your right rear tire slide under that amount of input. In general, you want to lower the brake bias until you get to that point, maybe add a click or two up just for safety, but that's what I like to keep it at. So how does that relate to raw numbers? Let's start all the way at the bottom with ARCA. I think at the intermediate tracks, you always want 57% brake bias. So that's going to be 60 in the settings and then -3 in the in-car. In the ARCA car, sometimes you're going to be at short tracks like those 1/4 mile or 1/2 mile bull rings. Everywhere except for Bristol, I would recommend having about 70% brake bias. You can maybe go a little bit lower, but 70 is a pretty comfortable amount. Bristol specifically, you still want that low brake bias usually. But to be quite honest with ARCA, I'm either at 57 or I'm at 70. It really is never anywhere in between. It just depends on what the track is asking of it. Trucks and Xfinity are pretty similar to me for brake bias. I find myself landing at about 55% to 57% for intermediate tracks, sometimes going even lower, but never really getting to the point where I feel like I have to, because I feel like I'm getting all the rotation I really need out of that 55 to 57% range. And then going to the shorter tracks, I do find that I like to get the brake bias up to about 65% is kind of the baseline that I mess around with here or there. And then finally, as some of you know, I don't drive a fixed, but I got some help from some buddies, Peter and AJ. I'm gonna leave their links right here. Go check them out. They're A-Fixed gods. Brake bias isn't the only brake related adjustment that you have in the car. You also have the master cylinders or the MCs. So Peter suggested that he doesn't touch the MCs very much and only uses the brake bias still, and he can go as low as into the 40s. But with AJ, he said that he does touch the master cylinder sometimes for tracks that you need even more turn. You want to add stronger rear cylinder to get even more rear brake than front brake to help the car turn. But once you get to those short tracks, you will need to raise that back up. And then one more thing for these short tracks, you want the front master cylinder and the rear master cylinder to be the same. You don't want any deviations between them. Steering ratio is a hot topic a lot in the oval community. Some people will swear that having a higher steering ratio will save your tires. And if you've seen one of my videos from about a year ago, you would know that I personally don't agree with that philosophy anymore. I think steering ratio is a comfort-based pick, but you want to know the difference between having a high steering ratio and a low steering ratio. Because saying that having a higher steering ratio saves more tires is based on something that is true, it's just not direct. Think about it this way. If you're going into a corner and your perfect steering angle is 25 degrees to the left, if you go over it, then you're going to be oversteering your wheel and starting to wear extra tire. Let's say that you go over that point by another 10 degrees. Well, with a higher steering ratio, 10 degrees is actually less on how much the wheel is turned compared to if you're at a lower steering ratio, in which case you would be punished less and get less extra tire wear and tire heat for going over the limit. But if you simply stay under the limit or at the limit, then you have nothing to worry about if you're at a lower steering ratio. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that having a higher steering ratio saves your tires, when having the correct steering technique saves your tires. And not just for the 16:1, for all the lower steering ratios, having the correct steering technique saves your tires. But with that being said, if you are a person who is prone to making those types of mistakes and you are comfortable with the feeling of 16:1, it doesn't hurt to stay on it. I personally use 16:1 just because that's what I'm comfortable at. That's what I use since the old days. And when I do make a mistake, I don't get punished as much. But some people really like the feel of the more twitchy lower steering ratios and being able to react quicker, and that is completely valid. At the same time, the size of your steering wheel matters too. I have a very small steering wheel with the Kama C5, so having a higher steering ratio for me feels pretty akin to somebody on a big Fanatec NASCAR rim at like 10 or 12:1. But overall, steering ratio is a comfort thing. Don't let someone tell you different. Choose whatever you want to, and then think about how to do the correct steering technique to not use too much steering wheel once you are in your given ratio. The next is steering offset, which is probably the most simple, but with a little bit of nuance. Now, I want to be clear, steering offset does not change anything about the car. You don't drive the car any differently with a different offset. Again, it's all about comfort, but some people like some things more than others. Me personally, I like having a steering wheel that is straight on the straightaways. I mean, that's pretty intuitive, right? Well, some people actually like having their steering wheels offset to the left a little bit on the straightaways, because when they make corrections to the right in the corners, they never have to cross back over the center. A lot of people do that, and it's a pretty interesting idea, but for me personally, I don't have much of a problem turning back to the right in the center of the corner, because that's just what I'm used to, so I'm perfectly fine with the steering wheel being straight. So what steering offsets give you a straight steering wheel? Well, in the ARCA and Gen 4 car, it is usually around -12 if you are running a 16:1 steering ratio, and for every click down on the steering ratio, you want to click up 3 on the steering offset for the wheel to be straight still. Every once in a while, there will be a setup for like a super speedway or something like that where they set the wheel completely straight already, and you'll feel that and you won't have to adjust it. But I think like 90+% of the time, I'm at -12 offset for the ARCA or Gen 4 car. For the truck, I keep everything default. Same thing with the next gen, according to AJ and Peter. They don't touch the steering offset at all, so you don't even have to worry about it. But for the B-Fix car, I do make a little bit of an adjustment. I tend to put the car at +2 steering offset, plus or minus 1 or 2, depending on how I'm feeling with my steering ratio. And then sometimes for the super speedways especially, the wheel will be set completely fine and you don't have to touch it. But for the intermediates and some of the shorter tracks, I find myself ending up at +2 quite a bit in the B-Fix car. And if you enjoy having your steering wheel offset to the left, you just want to click it a little bit more negative until you find a place where you're comfortable. But once again, you can have your steering offset at whatever you want, and I won't demand you to change it because it is all comfort. And finally, what is that last secret setting I was talking about? Well, turns out there are situations where I believe having your force feedback adjusted a certain way will help you perform in iRacing ovals. Mainly for tracks where you are full throttle all the way around and where smoothness is absolutely paramount. And this isn't just for super speedways. I am also thinking of like a truck race at Michigan, or maybe even at Vegas, when you have to really keep the car smooth to gain every little bit of time, especially in qualifying. Having a high force feedback will just bleed little bits of time in the corner by forcing your steering inputs to be less smooth in the moment. It's not worth too much, but it's worth enough to be worth some spots on the track. In the actual race, I don't think it's as big of a deal. A couple hundredths here and there don't really matter when everyone's 3 wide side by side. But for qualifying, if you're struggling at these full throttle type tracks, I would recommend trying to lower your force feedback to a point where you can barely feel it and where it doesn't affect you too much over the bumps. And I think you might gain some speed that you didn't know was possible. Now, is that the most realistic thing in the world? Of course it isn't, but that's what we're given, and I'm just telling you the tools that you can use. Let me know in the comments what settings you guys use, if you agree or disagree with some of the settings that I recommend. And then also feel free to like and subscribe to the video. I know I don't show that too much, but hey, when I talk about it, people do it. So thank you in advance. All right, thank you all for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all on the track.